I'm here with Diego Carrasco, and we prepared this presentation with Ernesto Treviño and Pablo Torres y Rivara. We entitled it as "Not Everyone Has the Chance and Equal Access to Open Classroom Discussion." And we are interested in inquiry how different is students with a different socioeconomic background have or not have the same opportunity than their peers to experience a certain school practice. In this case, specifically with open classroom discussion. So to start, I'm going to present you a series of relationships that conforms a larger scheme. And so first of all, the relationship between student background and student outcome is a well-known relationship, specifically between socioeconomic status and student achievement. Sorry. And for example, in this case, students from more affluent families and more educated families tend to achieve better outcomes, student outcomes in math, language, science, and also civic knowledge. So this is related with the fact that students from more affluent families receive greatest investments from their parents in comparison to the rest of their peers. Okay, so, but we also know additionally that school process play a large and significant role in student outcomes. So school will influence their students via their school practices, their school environment, and in general the opportunities to learn that they give to their students. So finally, if we put these ideas together, it's possible to think that students from more affluent families will have higher chances to access to schools with better school practices. So thus we can wonder, what if opportunities to learn are not equally distributed? And what if critical school practices are not present in all schools? So we are interested specifically in this first relationship between the students' background and the school processes, specifically in open classroom discussion. And why open classroom discussion? Well, open classroom discussion is a relevant school practices for the promotion of citizenry skills, and because in classrooms where students discuss more, they're gonna interchange more opinions, they have the opportunity to create critical thinking about different issues. So, guided by their teachers, in this sense, this school practice presents positive returns on different civic outcomes, including civic knowledge, political efficacy, endorsement of egalitarian values, for example, gender equality, or they're gonna have a orientation too. But the thing is that, however, the access to open classroom discussion environments might not be equal for all the students. In school effectiveness research, this is referred to as a learning opportunity gap, where the access to school practices is not equally distributed to the population of students. In this sense, for example, access to equality teachers is not equally distributed, or there's an unequal exposure to opportunities to learn. So This line of research in civic education is limited, and we found just 2 studies about this issue from the US and the UK. And disadvantaged students, in the case of the US, have lesser access to service learning and to the exercise of debates than the students from more affluent families. And in the case of UK, they found a small positive relationship between student socioeconomic background and output in classroom discussion among British students.
Hello everyone. What I'm going to show you is that what we did to try to give an answer to this inquiry. So we're using pretty much the same data that Daniel was using. So we're retrieving data from the International Civic and Citizenship Education, in which we have a random collection of schools. And in most of the countries, they would have between 3,000 and 5,000 students per country. So these are randomly sampled, representative samples of 8th graders from each participating country. And we are just going to use 2 main measures. One of them is this school practice that it differentiates all the schools between the countries that are participating in regarding the likelihood of discussing political issues within the classroom. So this is a school attribute, and we are using responses from the students if these events are occurring or not. What they are saying is if they remember, if there is any sort of discussion within the classroom that they are in. So we can say that there are, like, I don't know, in an extreme, we can have silent schools in which there is no discussion at all. And at the other extreme, we would have schools with a high likelihood of discussion of political and social issues. And for socioeconomic studies, we're using one of the most common measures, in which we put together books at home, parents' educations, and parents' occupation. So this sounds really simple to do, but there is a slight difference regarding the usual tradition of estimating gaps. So one of the most common known frameworks is WILMS, in which we can compare the student's background using whatever measure that we have regarding the socioeconomic status, and a measure of an attribute of the student itself, in this case student achievement. Yet what we're doing here is that we're comparing students with an attribute of the school. So the responses are not they're not student attributes, these are school attributes. So the issue is that if we ignore this difference, we might be tempted to use one of the approaches, which is the compositional model, and this might underestimate the effect that we're looking for. And if we use a simple regression, which would be the population model, then we are, maybe without any intention, we're assuming then that the responses of the students would represent directly the exposure of the treatment, in this case the school practice. So the main risk of using either of these 2 models is that we're going to certainly underestimate the effect that we're looking for. So overall, we have 3 main approaches. One of them is the plain regression. The second one is just using a multi-level model and including the socioeconomic status of the students and put this covariate at the single level. And the other one is the approach that we're proposing, which is to focus on the between level model. So in the next slides, I'm going to show you how this, what would be the geometric interpretation of this. So let's picture a system with equal distribution. So the slope of the parameter of interest, which is delta V, would be 0. So all the schools would be aligned together, and no matter the socioeconomic background of the students, they have the same likelihood to be exposed to this school practice, the amount of classroom discussion. So these lines are just expressing that if we pick up a random student from the same school, they might differ from the other peers. And this point is the most likely level of discussion for each school. So what we are interested in is the dots. So what would be the slope for those dots. And this is the parameter root. So if we have, let's say, like an average unequal system, it would be more or less looking like this. So we have some sort of steep slope between the schools. If this is higher, then the schools are going to be more separated and more conditioned by the backgrounds of the students. And this would be like a perfectly unequal system, in which the backgrounds of the students condition entirely their access to the school practice. So in general, these are the relationship between the kind of terms that we're looking for. And what we want to say is that the delta V, which is the sum that expresses just the inclinations of the schools, is what we're going to make an interpretation out of. So let's pick up 3 examples. So we're going to pick up Paraguay, which is at the extremes of the distribution of this gap. Then we have Hong Kong, which is more or less at the average level. And then we have a null effect, like Belgium, in which there is no conditioning of the access of the students on classroom discussions. And we're going to plot the 3 types of models. So the first model, the first plot, is just a population model. So this is just a simple regression. Then the other one at the middle is the within school model. This is what it happens when we just include socioeconomic backgrounds of the students at the single level in a mixed model. The third plot is the one that we argued is what you would like to interpret to have a conclusion regarding if there is an equal access or not. And if you compare the 3 approaches together, the most likely scenario is that the first one is always going to make an underestimation of the third one, because it's a blend of the 2 last plots. If we plot just an average effect regarding the distribution, it's like Hong Kong, and it's a little steep slope for the third plot. And if you fit these kind of models for a fairly equal system, the 3 regressions are going to be more or less similar. Their estimates are going to converge to the same inclination. So this is just a caterpillar plot in which we have all the estimates of all the countries that participated in for 2009 and 2016. So for more or less like half of them, we can see that there is some unequal access, that all of them are above 0. The extreme one is Paraguay in 2009. If we look at Italy, in particular, for 2009, there were no, we couldn't find any evidence of unequal access, but in 2016 there is some. There is just above the 0 line. And what we can do with the case of Italy is that we can take advantage of their stratification design, and we can identify what would happen in the center. For example, in the center is like much more unequal and maybe closer to the extreme group, whereas the case of the north and the south are close to 0, at least in the inferior limit of the confidence interval. And if we only make an interpretation out of their main point estimate, they're close to the average effect, closer to the kind of difference that we saw in Hong Kong.
So just for finish the presentation and discuss some points. So it's expected that as a school practice, open classroom discussion has a compensatory role in the political socialization of the students. Schools provide learning opportunities that are absent maybe in the home of their students. Overall, in the low socioeconomic students, it's expected that open discussion will be less frequent among less affluent families or less educated families. So there is an expectation that this practice will be mitigate effect of the lack of political socialization of disadvantaged students. And the thing is that the access to open classroom discussion is not the same for all the students. And in school effectiveness research, this is referred as a question of learning opportunity gap, where the access to certain schools is not equally distributed within the population of students. So, of course, not all students have the same learning opportunities, such as classroom discussion. The thing is that democratic system expect active citizens. So what happened with that? This democratic system also have to provide to all the students with the adequate learning opportunity to obtain these skills. So tilting the learning opportunity gap in the opposite direction is a democratic need.
One of the closing comments that we can make is that most of the evidence policy recommendations that can be done with either large-scale assessment or national studies is that if we use wrong models, we are at the risk of underestimating the effect and pretty much providing the wrong information to policymakers. And in this case, if we just follow common tradition within gap estimations, we're certainly going to underestimate the effect for what we show. And another key point that we can make with this exercise is that if participating countries in large-scale assessment want to take more advantage of the studies that they participated in, one of the key strategies that they can use is to have more investment in the stratification design. Italy is one of these examples in which they have included as a part of the stratification design the regions. So what we did show is that, for example, for the overall of the country, because of the size of the effect, they are going to cancel each other out, and then you would have the conclusion that there is no gap anywhere. But if you are allowed to separate the specific regions between each other, you can still spot where there is some unequal access for the countries. In the case of Chile, for example, what they do is that they stratify schools not on the region conditions, but they separate their kind of system. So they have voucher schools, private schools, and public schools, and they also would have displayed these kind of differences accordingly. So this is the presentation.